Good afternoon, Miss Range. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed by St. John.
Hello, thank you for having me.
What do you think your great-grandmother's role as a woman entrepreneur has played in progress of women and women's rights in South Florida and beyond?
Well, I think first that's a very good question. Um, I look at my great grandmother owning her own business as the unlock to her audacity, her ability to be bold, her ability to really lean in South Florida politics. And I say that because she was never afraid that her boss or employer would retaliate against her for her actions on the political scene. And so owning her own business gave her an extraordinary amount of freedom and independence that I think not only allowed her to uplift other women, but was also very inspiring to other women at the time. I know she was friends with a few women who also happened to be widows, and they all had their own independent ventures, whether it was owning multiple rental properties, owning a funeral home, owning a floral shop. She was a really big advocate for that. And so I think it's there's a lot of intersectionality. Yes, entrepreneurship is its own um, area, but it allowed for the women who owned their own businesses to be really active on the political scene, which then, of course, by secondhand, increased women's rights and women's ability to have the things that are due to them.
And did your great-grandmother encourage you to be an entrepreneur?
So I think, can I say that we ever had specific conversations about me owning my own business? Maybe not, but I definitely think there was an expectation that I would come home and help run one of our funeral homes. So by secondhand, yes, there's a great expectation in my family that we all uh, come home and work in the funeral home. But I can say that my grandmother is, of course, a huge inspiration to me. I think about her multiple times every single day. And I now have my own business. I'm not in Miami right now. I plan to come back home eventually. I'm still in DC, but I have started my own business in DC. And so her spirit still lives strong and firm inside of me.
Thank you for your answers.
Yeah.
What specific things do you believe that she did which were a bit of a benefit to all women?
Hmm. So I think that there are a few things that she did. First and foremost, I would say my grandmother's belief in education. And, they always say, educate a man, you educate an individual, but educate a woman and you educate a nation. And I think she really believed that. And so her first sort of start in activism starts out in the PTA for her children. And I think that eventually, with her, along with the NAACP, suing for integration in Miami-Dade County and fighting to ensure that, the water fountain stations were not above ground and that they were below ground and that there were proper lunch facilities. I think that action certainly helped with education. And of course, men benefited from that, but lots of young girls benefited from that. I also think that um, her deciding, so what we don't often talk about in her story is that the first time she ran for the city commission seat, she was unsuccessful by a very small margin, but unsuccessful. And that decision to run and mount a second race had to take a lot of courage, had to take I'm sure she thought, and I know she thought critically about that and deeply about that. And that decision to run the second time, I think really changes the Florida political landscape because she wins. And of course, we know that after that, lots of things opened up for Black women in Miami as a result of her decision to run the second time.
Does the things that she did inspire you to do the things that you do today?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think my decision to attend Howard University is included in that. I knew I wanted to go to an HBCU, but I wanted to be in a city where I felt like I could make a difference. And Howard University being in Washington, D.C., where I could intern in Congress, was a large part of that decision. My business that I own now is political consulting. Um, that influences me. I think her style influences me. My grandmother was an impeccable dresser. I mean, the list goes on. She was an amazing cook. I love that. I love that woman to pieces. So yeah, she inspires me every day. I often think, what would my great grandmother do before I do something?
Thank you.
How did Mrs. Range mentor girls and young women?
That's a very good question, Trinity. So I am still meeting people who I've never met before. Like if let's say I'm home in Miami and I'm in a meeting or I'm in the grocery store and I still meet people who say that my grandmother mentored them. And these people will have incredible stories about her taking them out to lunch. Um, this is a woman who was incredibly busy, but in some ways, she had lots and lots of time. I think she took mentorship seriously, more seriously than we do today. When I hear stories about my grandmother's role in certain women's careers and lives, I look at it more as sponsorship, which as you ladies progress into career, you'll see into your careers, there's a very different thing between mentorship and sponsorship. Sponsorship is when someone's in the room and is advocating for you, and mentorship is sort of the person that you call when you have a challenge. Not to say that my grandmother was an amazing mentor, but I really do feel like she was a sponsor. Oftentimes, when I hear stories, it's her picking up the phone and advocating on someone's behalf. It's her ensuring that someone gets in the room. It's her ensuring that someone gets a position because she really believed in them and felt in them. So she did that. She, of course, always was pouring into people, always encouraging women to think bigger, go bolder, open that business, run for that seat. I know lots of Florida politicians, including my former boss, Congresswoman Wilson, who spoke with my grandmother before they made their final decision to run for office. And I also think she mentored her grandchildren. There are very few granddaughters. The Range family is very male heavy, but she certainly mentored me, and loved me. So she did a lot. She did a lot.
And how does she mentor you?
So my fondest memories of my grandmother were around my schoolwork. I went to Charles R. J. Elementary, which is not very far from the funeral home. And if she didn't have a meeting, I was allowed to go upstairs and sit in her office. And she had this very long, beautiful, to describe it, I would say like a glass top dining room table in her office. And she would sit at the head and I would sit next to her and do my homework. And I was not a student that enjoyed math. From the time I came out of the womb, I did not like math. And she always insisted that we do my math homework. And she would go over it, and she was one of the first women that I knew that enjoyed math. And I now know as someone who owns your own business, who owns my own business, math is very important when you own a business because you have to make sure the books are correct. So I suspect that's why she enjoyed math. But she mentored me that way. The other way that I would say she mentored me is there was a specific situation. I was in the 3rd grade, and I had been placed into, I knew I was a smart child, and I had been placed into a remedial class. And I told my parents, I don't think I should be in this class. You know, this is maybe like the 2nd or the 3rd day of school. And I remember and my father kind of dismissed it slightly. And I was talking to my grandmother, and I must have said something that hinted to her that whatever I said was very serious and that I did not need to be in this class. And she sort of worked with me to teach me how to advocate for myself and get removed from this class. And that was one of the first times that I understood my voice and recognized that I have a voice. And it's really important for me to use it, because if I don't use it, things that aren't supposed to happen to me will happen to me. So find your voice, use your voice, and be confident in your voice. I would say that's how she mentored me.
Thank you for your words of encouragement.
Of course.
Ms. Range was the daughter of immigrants, as is Kamala Harris. What are some of the issues specific to being an immigrant which you recall her discussing?
So I don't ever really remember my grandmother identifying as an immigrant. Certainly her parents were not born in the States. And that doesn't mean that she didn't identify as an immigrant. We just didn't have many stories about it. She certainly insisted that the family stayed connected to our Bahamian heritage. So she emphasized that. But I would say there are certain things like her entrepreneurial spirit, her extreme laser focus on education, that are certainly very reminiscent of children and first generation people of immigrants. And as the matriarch of our family, she insisted that we continue to focus on those issues as well. I also think in political conversations that we had, my grandmother's perspective on the shifting dynamics of Miami's culture were probably informed by her family not being from the States as well. So not specifically, but those things.
Do you think some of the traits that she had rubbed off on you a little bit?
So because my grandmother's like my grandmother to me, but she's also just so amazing that I don't see them, but certainly people tell me. So obviously I'm 4'11". My grandmother was just 5 feet. So we have that in common. We have our stature in common. Certainly, as I said earlier, in her sort of pouring into me at an early age to find my voice and to use my voice and to be bold about my voice, I certainly feel like I have that as well. I haven't done something yet that I feel is to the stature of my grandmother in terms of being really bold, like taking trash down to City Hall, taking everybody's trash collection down to City Hall, or suing someone yet. I don't think I've done that, but I definitely feel she poured into me, and I feel the ultimate responsibility to make my community a better place, to advocate for Black people, all people of color, but specifically for Black people and Black women. I think those are the things that when I think about her, I want to do because I want to make her proud.
Thank you.
What single accomplishment of Mrs. Range are you most proud of?
I think there are a few. So certainly the decision to run again that second time, I'm very proud of that. I'm also very proud that the governor appointed her Secretary of Department of Community Affairs, right? So she was the first African American to lead a Florida state agency. I think that is dynamite. That is just amazing. And then this is one of my personal fun facts. And it's really funny because the home that I live in now, Amtrak, runs at the back of my house. But President Jimmy Carter appointed her to the Amtrak Commission. And that to me is just so cool for multiple reasons. One, because at some point, I'm sure my grandmother took a train for a trip and probably had to sit at the back of that train, right? And now she's running the commission. My grandmother, of course, went to mortuary school, but was not a college educated woman. And yet, and still, she is recognized by President of the United States of America. We just talked about earlier how she is the child of immigrants. And in her singular lifetime, a president of the United States says, "Oh, M Athalie Range down in Miami, Florida needs to be on the Amtrak Commission." I just think that is so cool. And now living in DC, you take Amtrak either to New York or down to Philly. And so as someone who loves the trains because of their ability for me to access places easily, I just love that fact that she was able to do that.
Do you know or have an idea of what she was most proud about?
So career-wise, I'm not sure. But what I do know about my grandmother is her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren were the lights of her life. And so I think that is probably what she was most proud of. The fact that her great-grandchildren have all gone off to college. We're all doing great things. One of her great-grandchildren is now in Miami working at the funeral home. He's now, a licensed mortician. That after, her husband tragically passing at the breakfast table and having to sort of pick up and run this business that turns into multiple businesses, all the while keeping your family intact. She was certainly proud of. And my grandmother was just absolutely amazing. She was never missed a sporting event, always knew what was going on in your life, always knew what your favorite meal was. And she was just literally, omnipresent, everywhere at once, somehow, everywhere at once. So that is what she was proud of.
Thank you so much.
Nora, is it your turn?
Oh, yeah. How would you contrast Ms. Range's service on the City of Miami Commission with Kamala Harris's service as a vice president?
Well, I think Vice President Harris, we're still under 100 days. And so she has a lot of runway before we can have a definitive answer to that question. But I certainly think that as women, they are probably having some of the same thoughts in terms of my grandmother was the, first Black person on that commission, Kamala, while she is not the first African American to serve in the White House, and I guess rather she's actually in the executive building. She's still the first woman, right, to serve in what we deem the highest office in the land. And so there is a weight on you, there's a responsibility that's placed on you, there is the constant desire to push further for your people, right? But to also play into, for lack of a better term, politics. Because in those positions, you're not just elected for African Americans or South Asians in Vice President Harris's case. You're also elected to serve all people, right? But we know that the inequities are so devastating, and sometimes you just really want to lean in and say, let's take a pause, and I just really want to help my people. But you can't do that when you're in those elected positions. And so finding the balance, I think, Vice President Harris is probably really going through right now. And then also finding the balance of, I look at Vice President Harris and her love for her family looks just like my great grandmother's love for our family. And so now balancing that, right? Making sure that you're still showing up and that you're still present and that your family still feels Mama's love. It's not easy.
Do you think Kamala Harris is an inspiring person as she is to many other people?
I think so. I think Vice President Harris is her story is magical. She's first generation. Her parents are immigrants. She goes to one of the best universities in the world, Howard University. And I talk about this with my friends all the time. When you see people of that stature, you say, do you think they planned this? I don't think when Vice President Harris was on the yard at Howard University, which is that's what we call our main campus. I think she was a very ambitious young woman. I think she knew she wanted to go far. I don't think she planned to be the Vice President of the United States at that time in her life. When I look at my great grandmother, and I remember we asked her, is this something you had planned on doing? And she said, absolutely not. And in fact, if my husband were alive at the time when I mounted my run for city commission, I don't think he would have been for it, right? It's not, these are things, these are moments in time where you are called. And Vice President Harris is called. And because of that, I think we all see it, we all feel it, and we're all inspired by it.
Thank you.
How do you feel knowing the first female vice president graduated from the same university as you did?
I think it's awesome, Trinity, right? It's like, it just solidified. I already felt that Howard University was the best, but it just solidified it. But on a serious note, I think that it reinforces my knowledge that I can really do anything that I want. If I really put my mind to it, I can. If you step foot on Howard's campus and you just take a moment to think, and that's the same way with many historically black colleges or universities, just to think. Just sometimes I would just sit in the yard and think, wow, Toni Morrison could have sat on this bench, or Zora Neale Hurston could have sat here. And I'm so glad that, barring this pandemic, next year, hopefully in August, but certainly next year and the years to come, there'll be some freshmen on campus who can sit and say, wow, the vice president sat here. I think it solidified. There's always this talk about whether HBCUs are relevant. Do they produce good, upstanding citizens? And the answer unequivocally is yes. Unequivocally. These are institutions that are needed, because I question if Kamala hadn't gone to Howard, if she would have had the courage and the strength in her voice. Something about being in the majority, right? And being in a place that fosters growth and inspiration and encourages you to be the best you can be. At Howard, we often say iron sharpens iron, right? To be in that space really helped to develop, it set the foundation for the woman we see today. And had she gone to another university, I'm not sure it would have been there.
What do you think
Hopefully
Kamala Harris learned at Howard that helped her become the vice president?
Oh, that's a loaded one. I think so. She certainly learned about her political activism, right? Her parents were activists. She'd grown up in that, but as she comes to Howard, she's able to see that solidified and realized. She's able to really visualize the political landscape. Growing up on the West Coast, Washington, D.C. can kind of seem like another world. It can kind of seem like an abstract idea. But if anyone has ever been to D.C. or Howard for that matter, I mean, the Capitol building is right down the street. She was able to really engage with advocacy in a different way. I also think the development of a sisterhood, which she has with her sorority sisters and some of her other closest friends that aren't Greek, help that those kinds of friendships are really important as you progress. I think about myself, my friendships that I developed on campus are extremely important to me. And oftentimes when I'm interviewing for a job or thinking about a transition, some of the first people I call are my friends who went to Howard University with me to ask them, what do you think about this? Or can you connect me with the person that has done this already, right? That network that we have at Howard University is second to none. So I think that those are some of the things.
Thank you so much.
Did you think of your great grandmother when the election outcome was announced in November?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. After those, what was that, 7 days, 8 days? I tell you, ladies, I did not leave my couch. I slept on my couch because I thought it was going to be announced at 2 a.m. in the morning. I thought of how proud my grandmother would be in this moment. There is a recording that I watched of her years ago that she did. It must have been in the 90s. And it's around Martin Luther King days, so maybe it was in the early 2000s. But the reporter sort of asks her a question about, does she think that the United States of America would ever have an African American president? And my grandmother's response was, not in her lifetime, but, and I could be potentially misquoting, but she said something to the effect of that when her bones were ivory and when her children's children had grown up to be adults, that she hoped, or that when her grandchildren grew up to be adults, her great grandchildren, she'd hoped that they would see it. And I thought, how fantastic that not only have we seen it once, but we've seen it twice. And we're on track to see it, I'm hoping, many more times in my lifetime. So yes, I certainly thought of her. I certainly thought how proud she would be that, you know, my grandmother was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I thought how proud she would be that Kamala is also a member as well.
Have you ever felt that being Kamala Harris is a good thing?
Narai, can you ask me that one again? Ask me that question again.
Like, if you were in Kamala Harris's place, what would you do?
What would I do if I were in Kamala? Oh, that's a heavy one. You know, I don't know that any of us know what we would do if we were in that position. I think I can tell you some things that I would ensure that I did. I would ensure first and foremost that I stayed very, very, very close to God, right? Because in a space like that, like the one she is in, staying close to Jesus is your first order of business. I think the other thing I would do is really take a moment and consider what I want my legacy to be. I think so often she could get swept up really quickly, right? It's like you're running, then you're elected, and now you're in office, and there really is no break. There's no moment to really think, but you have to be strategic and you have to think. And so if I were her, I would think about what is the thing that I want people to remember me for. For example, with President Obama, it's healthcare. For Vice President Harris, it seems that it could be immigration. But I would like her, if I were her, I would find maybe 2 issues that I really cared about. And for me personally, one of my issues would be to solidify the success of historically Black colleges and universities in this country, because we gave Vice President Harris so much. I, as also someone who went to Howard University, I would really do all that I could to ensure that was taken care of. And then the other thing is that I would do legacy-wise is I would focus on solving our higher education crises in this country when it comes to student loan debt. We have to find a pathway forward. We cannot continue to strap 18 to 25-year-olds with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and then expect them to buy a home and raise a family of 4, all in the same breath. Just can't happen. And there's a solution. Other countries do it. We just need to figure out our solution.
Thank you.
How do you believe that Mrs. Range would have reacted to see female Kamala Harris as the Vice President of the United States?
I think she would react well. I think my grandmother is someone she was very proud of people, but she certainly had high expectations. And so I think she would be proud of Kamala, but her next order of business would be, okay, and what are we doing? And I think if she were to have a conversation with Vice President Harris, there would be 2 things she would say. And first and foremost, it would be, what are we going to do about the children? And when I say the children, I mean, as we know, my grandmother had a strong passion for education. And here we are in a time where we're going into year 2 of our students. And Trinity and Araya, you probably have experienced this, missing out, learning virtually, missing out on quintessential life experiences. And we don't even know the data yet, but what's not really being discussed, and the angle that I think my grandmother would think about it from, is what about the children who didn't have access to Wi-Fi? What about the children whose home environments were not sufficient to learn? What about the children who had difficulty learning virtually? Are we just going to pass them along? Are we going to fail them? What is the plan for the children? So I think that's the first thing she would discuss with her. And then the second thing I think she would think about or encourage Vice President Harris to think about critically is housing. We are going through a bit of a housing, I won't say crisis, because we've certainly been in a housing crisis, but a housing challenge. And so as we get closer and closer to this September 30th or September deadline for foreclosures, we as a country need to figure out how we're going to handle this. We cannot just put millions of people out on the streets. We are a wealthy nation. There should be no homelessness here. There is a path forward, and we need to figure out what that is. So I think those would be the two things that she would ask Vice President Harris to think about critically.
What are two critical things you would ask her or talk to her about?
So student loan debt, that would be mine. Let's think about that critically. Let's solve it. I think we all know the talking point of wiping out the student loans as they are, but that doesn't help Trinity, right? Who is a senior on her way to college. Do I not have student loan debt, but you do? Does Naraya have student loan? I don't have student loan debt, but Naraya does. Like it's not a sustainable model. Let's figure out something that's actually going to work. And the second thing I would ask her to think about critically, I think I would also focus on the children as well, in terms of it's a lost year. What are we going to do as a nation to restore the American psyche? It was not only was it a year in isolation, but for Black and Brown people, it was a tough year. Somehow we were inside, but we were under assault. And I think I would ask her to be more bold or think more boldly when it comes to, I said children earlier, but connecting it to children and gun violence, to think more boldly about we have the solutions, I guess, but to really solve this crisis, there are too many families in our country who, on a normal day, where a normal day turns out to be very tragic. A trip to the supermarket or to the nail salon should not end in tragedy. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, or I know the COVID-19 pandemic was enough. That's enough. We don't need gun violence on top of that, right? And so to really think about it, everything she does, think about the children, because the children are the generation that's inheriting this mess that we're not really thinking about critically, that we're pretending we can't solve the issues. And we can solve it.
Thank you.
Miss Range was a woman of great wisdom. What advice do you think that she would give Kamala Harris as a trailblazer and a woman leader?
So my grandmother was very interesting because she always said she didn't give advice. And when she did, it was very specific. She never did the, generalized. It would be, what is your situation? And we're going to figure out a strategy and how to solve it. That was sort of her, how she approached situations. I would say, though, I'll go out on a limb here, and I would say that she would probably advise Vice President Harris to lean in, think boldly, like I said earlier. Don't be afraid to shy away from the issues. Don't listen to the newspapers or to the polls, right? Because history will remember things correctly when the present moment does not. And two, in her moments of, shall we say, for lack of a better word, weakness, or in the moments when she may be unsure about where to go and what to do, know that she's standing in the hills of Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan and M Athalie Range and Congresswoman Carrie Meek. There are millions of Black women who came before her, those whose names we know, and many more whose names we don't know, who are her ancestors are they're standing in the gap for her. They really are. All we need her to do is just move in the right direction. I think that's what she would say.
What advice
What'd
would
you say,
you
Naraya?
give Kamala Harris?
Oh, I don't know if I would give Vice President Harris any advice. I would say have fun, as much fun as you can while you're doing it, right? These are I love documentaries, and just the other day I was rewatching H, which is on Hulu. It's Hillary Clinton's documentary. And the moment that Hillary's about to go out on stage to accept the Democratic nomination, this is in 2016, Huma, her longtime aide, stops her. She says the only thing she remembers about this moment is Huma stops her and says, "Take it all in," before she goes out. And I think that's what I would say to Vice President Harris. Like I would say, take it all in. Take in the fact that you are the first woman to hold this office, but you won't be the last, but you are the first. Take it in that not only are you the first woman, but you're the first Black and Southeast Asian woman. Take that in. Take in the fact that you have, some of the most pressing issues ahead of you, right? This administration could really determine where our country goes in the next generation. Take that in, understand it, embrace it, and then have fun. Like I loved the week after inauguration that she was jogging. I'm not sure if you ladies saw this, but she was doing the stairs at the Lincoln Memorial. It's like, yes, do those things. Do as much as you would normally, and do all the fun things that you wouldn't normally do, because it's going to fly by. I'm sure it'll be a stressful 4 years, but it's going to fly by. And I don't want her to wake up and say, oh, was it a dream? I don't remember any of it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Miss Range, it has been an honor interviewing you this afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and happy Women's History Month.
Yes. Happy Women's History Month, Trinity. Happy Women's History Month, Naraya. I'm excited to see how you two women make history. I know that you can, and I know that you will. And I just look forward to us all being together in person real soon, and be safe.